Texture is pretty important in the fashion world. We use texture to create interest and emotional response. Think of a soft baby blanket or the contrast between the smooth leather and the fur of the collar on the guy on the right. So it's pretty important when you're doing a fashion illustration to be able to use, to be able to show the texture, to be able to show what the fabric feels like. So you get the feeling for it by looking at the illustration. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of different things: how to do lace, how to do a sheer fabric, just some ways to use the materials to achieve the kind of texture that you want to achieve. So here I'd like to show you the difference in how you would represent two different types of fabric. If you look at these evening gowns, you have here, for instance, two blue evening gowns. This fabric here is kind of matte, not very shiny. It might be a chiffon or something. But if you look at this one here, you can see that it's a very shiny, satiny type of fabric. How can you tell the difference? Well, it's in the contrast. Something that's shiny, that has a lot of contrast, is going to have a much bigger contrast between the lights and darks. So even though they're a very similar shade of royal blue, you see some very, very dark blues, almost black in the shadows, and some very, very pale blues in the highlights. Whereas here, since it's kind of a matte fabric and not shiny, you don't see that much variation. You see, yes, a darker blue in the folds and a lighter blue in the highlights, but nowhere near the contrast as this one. So I just would like to show you the difference in how they would be rendered. So I'm just going to very quickly sketch just the way the skirt would be here. This is the one on the left. There's some folds going like this, and I'm going to kind of simplify the hem a little. And then this skirt, I'll put right next to it. Once again, the folds are coming down, so that one looks a little bit like that. So now the difference in the way I would render them is I would, with my paintbrush, and I think I can actually use the blue straight from the pan here. It's very similar kind of blue. So I'll put some here. Well, actually, yeah, that's not too far off. It's important when you're doing a fashion illustration to get the colors correct. I think there's a little bit more purple in there, so maybe I'll just grab a touch of purple and mix it in there. Yeah, I like that better. All right, so in doing well, I'll do this one first so I don't smear. In doing this one, I want to get some very lights and some very darks. So you can see the shadow comes down this side, and it's in all the folds, and there's a lot of shadow near the hem. So I'll bring it down this side, keeping it nice and dark. In a lot of the folds here, you see shadows coming up like this. Coming down here. Down here. Now we're going to get some mediums in here. Now, with watercolor, what happens a lot of times is as it dries, it lightens. So I'm gonna leave that go for now. See, I'm leaving some whites in because I want to really show there's some highlights there. I'm getting a lot of the mediums in with that blue. When it dries, I suspect there won't be any dark blues in here, so I'll come back with blue again and make it darker. But in the meantime, I'm gonna come over here. Now here in this one, you don't really see any whites in the highlights. So I think I'm going to take the blue here, add some water, because remember with watercolor we always start out with the lights, and then you get darker on top of it. I'll just kind of fill the whole thing in with the light blue. While it's still damp, because the folds are soft. See here the darks to the lights have harsher edges because of the reflection. Here they're kind of softer edges. The transition is softer because of the softness of the fabric and the fact that it's not got that shine in it. I want it very strong, so I'll get some more blue. So you see it's kind of it's blending in because it's still wet, so it's kind of blending some. Maybe a little bit too much. I can always correct that a little bit when it dries. But I do want the softer edges like that. I don't want those hard edges, so I like what's happening there. So that's probably how I would do that one. I might go in and put a couple of sharper folds in when it's dry. Let's see, is this one? Yeah, it was getting dry enough to... I'm going to come back with a darker blue and maybe add a little more purple to it, because you can see some of the folds are very, very dark. So maybe down in here, maybe over here, and then here I might use a smaller brush if I had one handy, but I didn't get one out, so I'll just use the tip of this brush and be careful. So I'm going to get some very dark blues in here. So you see now that looks like very shiny and reflective. This looks a little softer. I might put a little more shadow in. This looks softer and not reflective, just kind of a... So that's the difference between a fabric that doesn't shine and a fabric that does shine. Okay, next I would like to show you how to make a fabric look sheer. If you look at this photograph, you see the model is wearing this funky kind of bubbly outfit, but on top of it she has a kind of a sheer chiffon or maybe organza, I think it's chiffon, wrapped as kind of a shawl over the front and hanging down. You can see her skin through the fabric, so I'm going to show you how to do that. The easy thing is the fact that watercolor is transparent, so it's the ideal medium to do that with. So let me just first kind of quickly sketch the model in a little bit. Let's give her a nice long neck, shoulders. And her body. Looks like this hip is up higher. Okay, so that's we're just concentrating on the area where we have the sheer going, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. Sometimes I like to use, instead of a black marker, I like to use brown or gray. It's not quite as harsh to do the outlining with, so I'm going to do a little bit of outlining here with this brown color. Some illustrators really don't like to outline at all, and I don't often outline, but for beginners it's a lot easier to have some kind of an outline. So there's a fold there, so I'm putting a little bit of a marker line there. Let me see, we have her skin, her arm coming like this, and then we have the fabric coming down. I'm going to draw the edge of the fabric because there is a bit of a line there because of the hem in it, so you can see something going on there. Her fingers will be here. And her hip. We're not going to do the whole model. We're just doing enough to get a feel for what's happening with this transparency. So here I'm going to give her other arm. She has fingers on that arm too. Okay. So that's enough to know what's going on. That's all I really need. Let me erase my pencil. Actually, I'm going to, I didn't show where the ends here. It seems to be going into the waistband, and then it kind of hangs down from there. Okay, so for starters, I'm going to give her her skin tone. She has very, very pale skin, so I'll use the technique I used before, where I'm going to put a little bit of orange paint on here, but I'm going to pretty much use a lot of water to make it a very pale tone. Pale and warm, which is what her skin is. And I'll just paint in some skin tone. You can see the skin through the sheer part, so that's why I want to put the skin color in before I even paint that purple on top, the chiffon. So I'm not putting the skin tone where this is, because that has a gray in the background. So you see I just put the skin tone where the skin actually is. Okay, so I gave it a few minutes for the skin tone to dry. I don't want the color of the fabric to bleed over top of it. But before I put on the sheer is on top of everything. So that would be the last thing I do. I'm going to do it on top. You always think of the layers and the order of the layers. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to put in some of this texture here. So this is going to also show you a little bit about creating a texture like this. That's, first of all, gray. If you look at it, you see there's a gray background, and then these raised dots are some kind of white or bright or silver. So I'm going to start with that gray background. So, you know, behind everything, I'm going to paint this gray. It's a little darker here under the bust line where there's some shadow. It's a little lighter up here where the light is hitting it. So that's how I'm going to paint it. Then I'm going to have to let that dry a little bit so that I can put the texture on top. So what I'm going to use for that, I want something opaque. If I used watercolor, well, first of all, I don't have white watercolor. There is white gouache sometimes in watercolor kits, but it's still not real opaque because of the nature of watercolor. I like this to be very opaque to go over top of that gray, so I'm going to use acrylic paint. I use acrylics quite a bit. I'm going to take a little dish I have here, put a little bit of white. This is titanium white, which is about the whitest you can get. Put it in there. And instead of using a paintbrush, which, you know, tends to be soft and go every which way, I'm going to use this shish kebab pick. You see it's got a point on one end and it's flat on the other, and it's great for like scratching into paint and doing all kinds of things. You can really use any tool you can find to paint with, whatever makes it easier. I'm going to use the flat end because, see, it has a nice round shape, and it's about the right size, I believe, for me to put these little guys on here. So I'm going to use it just like a stamp. Fill it with paint, and I'm going to come in here and stamp the circles on. You know, kind of geometric. They're kind of in the same, you know, equally spaced. So that's how I'm going to do them. And I'm going to just... Now, you don't have to fill up every square inch of this dress with the circular shapes. What you do when you're painting a fashion illustration and suggesting texture or whatever, a pattern, you're suggesting it. You're not, you don't have to this isn't a realistic painting like Michelangelo might have done. This is, remember, it's about the mood and setting the mood and creating a desire for the garment. So rather than me filling in every single last dot, I might put more of them where there's highlights here, maybe less of them in the shadows. But I'm just basically suggesting this this pattern here. So I'm going to put these on, and then we're going to have to let it dry again so that I don't want to smear the white when I put the transparent on top. So that might be enough. Maybe I'll put a few in here. You notice I'm not putting as many in the shadows. If I did do them in the shadows, I might actually mix up a bit of a gray rather than the pure white, because they would be a little darker in the shadows, even though they are white. They wouldn't appear quite so white in the shadows. So I believe that's probably enough to suggest this pattern. You put some here in the belt because the belt's pretty much in view here. Have to keep going back and refilling. Okay, so now I'm going to have to leave this dry before I put the purple on top, because I don't want to smear that. It takes a little while for acrylic to dry, so we'll have to just play a little bit of waiting game again. The final step is going to be to actually paint the purple itself, the violet. I'm going to come in here with, I think my purple in my pan is a little too blue, so I'm mixing it with some of the red there. Let me see, it needs a little more red perhaps. Yeah, I think that's kind of the color purple it is. So I got a nice rich amount of it. When I start, I'm going to start as usual. When you start with watercolor, you want to start a little bit lighter. So I'm going to put some over here with more water in it. Not quite as much paint, but more water so it's going to be a lighter shade. This is called a wash when you add water to watercolor. So there's a lot of water in this one. It won't be very dark. So I'll start with this sheerest stuff. Well, actually, I'll put the whole thing on as one layer. I'm going to go over. So you see, as I paint over it, you can still see the skin showing through, which is exactly what you want, because that's what you see here in the photograph. Now here her skin is not covered. It's just covered here. There's some behind her here, so I'll fill this in. That was the buzzer from my bread. So it's behind her. It's also here on top of her skin. I need a little bit more from here. So you see, I'm still seeing her skin over top. I can still see these little bubbly, whatever they are, on the fabric underneath. Now it's not on the belt, so I'm going to be careful to stay around that. It's here. It actually something like that. I'm not going much further, I'm just going. So that's the beginning, the sheer part of it. Now, where the fabric doubles over on itself, where it's solid here and has, you know, more color to it, I'm going to come back in with a little bit stronger of a purple. I've added too much water to all of this, so there we go. So now we have a little stronger shade, and we're going to come back in here. And now while it's wet, it's going to bleed and move around a little bit more softly, which might be good for some places, like here, where I want it to kind of bleed and look like soft folds. But see, it's behind her arm, the part that has the shadow, so I'm leaving her skin show through there. Now here over top of her arm, there's some folds like this, so it's a little bit darker. So I'm going to go in there like that. Now you see some draping with extra layers going on back here, so it's got a darker area. This is all getting very soft. I might want to go in when it's drier and make it more solid here. Definitely more solid over top of this fold, because it's like doubled or tripled or whatever. The fabric's more opaque because there's more layers of it, so I put another layer of watercolor on top. Let me see, over here there seems to be some folds like this. On this side you can see underneath in the back definitely some folds coming down, but in the front it's just the sheer over her skin. You don't see any folds, so I'm not going to do anything there. Looks like it comes down here underneath her arm and comes around like this. It's draped up, so I'm going to give it that. And then here we have a little bit of stronger where it's folded over on the edge, a little here. So there you go. So you can see it looks kind of sheer because her skin shows through. The only thing I might do is I might want to cover the white here. You can see here, it's so many layers you can't really see those spots through, but of course the acrylic paint repels my watercolor, so you can still see them through. So I might actually have to, if I want it to look exactly the way it is in the photograph, and I can't achieve it with watercolor, I might have to go in and mix some acrylic paint in this violet color and cover those up. I probably shouldn't have, in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have put them there because you can't see them through the photograph. So that was kind of a mistake on my part. But I can fix it by using an opaque paint like an acrylic. So I think this is nice. You get the effect of the sheer fabric over top of her body, which is exactly what we wanted to achieve. I think I'll work with a solid here and then show you that and see if that kind of helps repair where that shouldn't have shown through. So here she is. I've mixed up the acrylic and painted it over. The hardest thing was matching the watercolor. I also came back in with the watercolor and put a few more darks in, because usually you'll find out when the watercolor dries, it looks a lot lighter than it was when you were working on it. So you oftentimes have to come back in and give it a little bit more oomph. You just don't know how it's going to dry. It always dries a lot later. So I think that pretty much achieves the, I'll give it a few more wrinkles coming across. I think that pretty much achieves the sense of transparency of this purple or violet chiffon over top of and the acrylic did cover over those little bumpy things, which like I said, I should have thought of before I started. So that's it. That's how you do different textures and a sheer over top of those same textures. All right, I'm going to do a demo showing you how you would make the look of lace in a garment. I've picked this one, which is white lace, but the same technique pretty much works for any color lace. So it's a lot like the sheer fabric in that you're going to use the layers of watercolor so that you, first I'm going to sketch the figure here, so that you start with this, and you do the order of the layers, the order you see them. So you start with the skin, because that shows through, because lace is fairly sheer. This has got these big, pretty scallops on it. And then as you paint on top of it, you'll get the effect of the whatever. In this case, it's white lace over the skin. So that's sort of roughed in lightly. What I'm not going to use any outlines this time. I'm going to just go with my pencil. All right. So first of all, I'll take my paintbrush and the water, and first I'm going to do the skin tones like I've always done. Let me see. Put some here. Once again, she's kind of a pale face, so I'm using the orange with lots of water. I probably should do a demo showing different range of skin tones. It's just a question of mixing the right color. Okay, so her face. Even though you see the white around her collar, I'm going to achieve that with some line work because it's lace, and you still can see her skin color peeking through a little bit. So wherever I think the skin peeks through, I'm going to put the skin down first. So you can see it coming through the V here. You can see it, now you don't see it here because there's a lot of layers of white stuff going on, but you can see it in her lower arm here. You can see it coming through the lace. So I'm going to paint some skin tone there. I don't see any hands, maybe they're in her pockets. So that's as far as I'm going to go with that. All right. We have this lovely scallop thing on the edge of the lace, and then it's kind of puffy, could be chiffon there. There's some shadows in it. They look mainly gray because it's a very pure white. So I have some black here that I mixed before, some gray. This gray might be a little bit dark. Let me try some and see. Yeah, that's a little dark. I'm going to put a lot of water with it so it's not too dark. I think that what it is a lot of gathers here, so I'm going to make it look like there's shadows from where the fabric is gathered on this side too. And even under here, I see there's some shadows in here a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do with that. There might be actually across her skin here a little bit of shadows as the fabric folds a little bit over her skin, so I could do that. I'm going to give a little shadow under her chin here. In fact, I'm going to indicate where the eye. I'm not, really going into doing a face for this, but I hate to have her be totally faceless, so I'll give a little bit of shadows there. Okay, so there we have the skin and some shadows on the fabric. I'll do some black for the shorts here. Now these look like they're leather, and remember that where I showed the difference between a high contrast where something's shiny and you see the white. This is what this is. It's high contrast. You see some pure white highlights and some very dark blacks. So in keeping with that, I'm going to use that same technique, belt buckle here. So I leave a little white for the belt buckle. It looks like it's very black up here around the belt. Now here, I want to go too black underneath that because you see it just looks kind of gray. So if I go solid black, it might be a little too much. So there's the belt. The other side of the belt. Oh, I forgot to leave those little. And then, so I'm going to let the scallops out of it. And we'll get some grays, but a lot of solid blacks too. These are like pleats, I guess, in the shorts, and then you see sort of some variation at the zipper here. So you see I'm letting there be some grays in it. And some darker blacks. so that's about what I'm going to do with the pants. Now I'm hoping that this is starting to dry here. All right, so because it's on a white background, I want to see the edges of the sleeves. I'm going to have to do something to show those edges. What I might do is, let me see, I have a pack of markers here in shades of gray. You could use pencil because that will give you a shade of gray. I don't want to do a heavy black outline, that might be too much. But actually I like these markers because I have various shades of gray, but also they're a brush tip, so they're not going to give me a real thin, hard edge. I can kind of get thick and thin if I want to. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a outline around the edge so you can, even though there's no, in real life there's no outlines on things, we want to be able to see the edge of this. And with the white background, like I said, you're not going to be able to see it. Maybe the edge of this here. It's a little bit away from the skin and someplace in the outside edge here. So that gives us a little bit of, and maybe I'll define these a little bit with the marker. These little pretty scallop things. Some edges like this. You see there's some scallop things there which would have a bit of a shadow, so maybe if I use this marker you'll see as though there were a little shadow around them. Same thing over here. Here's that little triangular scallop. Maybe like this. Just to make sure we don't lose that. It's a very, I think, important detail to the garment is all these little scallopy things. Okay. That's about as far as I'm going to go with this. Maybe I'll show a little bit of gathers here where okay, so now we're going to get down to the actual getting the lace in there. I think actually before I do that I might need to put a little bit more gray behind these, although I won't be able to put the white on. So that's too dark. So if something's too dark, remember we can put water on the brush and pick up a lot of the paint and lighten it. So that's what I'm going to do here. Okay. So now we have enough gray that I can actually put some white on top and you'll see the white. Maybe I need some here in these scallops too. Oops, a little too dark. All right. So now I will take a, you need a white marker or a white pencil or a white, you can do it with white paint and a really fine paintbrush, but it's so much easier to use a gel pen. Gel pens are great because they're pretty opaque. See, I can actually draw right on here. Now some of the larger areas I might use paint, but to get these nice fine scallops, I come in with this white gel. That's not really showing up so great, is it? Let me try this one. Yeah, I like that one better. Okay. So once again, I'm not exactly drawing every single little piece of lace. What I'm doing is just kind of doing roughly something that looks like the kind of pattern we have going. Sort of a scribbly thing I'm putting on there around the edge of this. Yeah, this just isn't really getting very white. So around the edge of these scallops, there's some white. Yeah, you know, this white is not as opaque as I'd like it to be. I might actually switch and move to a white brush. So if I put some acrylic paint in here, the white, I'm going to have to thin it with some water because it's a little too thick to flow. And you see I'm using a very fine brush, has a very good point. So now you're going to be able to see. the detail here. So you see it's kind of a scribbly effect. You get, this looks, you want it to look just loose and kind of scribbly, because that's what lace looks like, loose and kind of scribbly. There, now I like what's happening. Yeah, I think the white gel pen just wasn't strong enough to, they're old too, I've had them for a while, maybe it doesn't have as much ink in as it should. But this is getting the effect I want. See, I'm just getting, now there is also a couple little designs in the middle here, little florally things, so once again, just kind of a scribble, what I'm putting on there. Here at the neckline, remember I said this is going to be a little more intense, a little more solid. So I'm putting those nice big swirly things in with white paint. Some scribbly stuff here. And at the top there's a lace. Oftentimes on the edge, if you just put little dots, it looks like the edge of the lace. I'd like the same thing in here, some little white to indicate that it's lace, not just... So I keep going back to get some water to get this. I want it thick enough to be opaque, but thin enough that I can leave a little white line, not just big blobs of paint behind. So... and here on the edge, see these polka dots kind of make it look like the edge of lace. I'm putting these little dots around it. See, I'm doing it pretty quickly because I want it to be just loose and free. I don't want to get real invested in trying to exactly draw what's like the pattern of this lace. That's not the point of being realistic and drawing exactly what it is. You just want it to look lacy and kind of frothy. So I think that might be enough. Now, because the white, I made her skin so pale, and the white is also very, light color, obviously. So I think what's happening is you're not really seeing it as much as I would like you to see it. So I might be tempted to go back in with a very fine gray marker and put just a little bit of shadow around the edge of some of these white lines so that you can see what's going on. So where is that gray marker? So this is a very light gray. So I might just come in here and, just shadow off the edge of this so that you can tell it's the edge of the lace. Come up here, maybe the top edge of it, you get it. And even in here, maybe you need just a little bit of a, and that could also be done with the brush and the gray paint. If I clean my brush well and get a very light gray, I could also just get a little bit of a shadow on the edge of it using the brush. That might be a little too dark. So you have to just kind of play around with it. Yeah, maybe you want to test a technique before you go on your final drawing to see if you can get what you want. The lace should be subtle and light and soft looking. So that's what these things in here might need a little bit of. Okay, and so maybe in here to see some of that lace pattern, maybe we need some of this gray to make it look lacy. You can make a lot of decisions as you're doing it when you see what's happening or not happening, and analyze what you think you need to get it to look like what you want it to look like. And I'm analyzing that I needed some little gray outlines to give it a little bit of a. So you see, what I have here is not at all an exact reproduction of that lace. It's just kind of a suggestion of it. Once again, we're doing a suggestion. When we do fashion illustrations, we're suggesting something. We're not doing a hyper-realistic, this is exactly what you see. It's not a photograph. If you wanted it to be a photograph, you could just use a camera and take a photograph. this is not a photograph, it's an artistic rendition of what you're looking for. Now I didn't do anything on the sleeves yet. Let me get some lace running down the sleeves. You see there's these sort of floral clusters on that lace. So I'm going to put a couple of floral clusters in like this. And there's probably some kind of little squiggly lines connecting the floral clusters. Put a little bit of that in to suggest that there's some lace on the sleeve. The other sleeve, the same thing. So now you see she has lace on her sleeves. And that's probably really all you need to do to suggest. Now, I would let it dry. I would go back in and I would do something more with the face. And I might, after it dries, look at it and see, well, where does it maybe need a little more detail? I like what the lace looks like on this side better than on that side. So maybe this side needs some of those same kind of help with the extra gray. I don't know. But, you know, it's oftentimes when you get to the point where you think you're close to being done, then you look at it and you analyze it, what does it need now? I think this is probably some gathers here. Okay, but that actually is starting to look like lace, which is what I was trying to achieve. So I think I'm happy with what's going on here. I would do a little bit cleanup. I would do some more. Obviously, she needs a little bit more lace around the neck. The neck is more opaque, so I would put some more white into that. You have to decide as you go. For now, you get the idea. That's what we do when we try to make something look like lace. Okay, after some more tinkering, I think I've achieved a reasonable look of lace. It wasn't all that easy, I think, because I made the skin too pale. If the skin were darker, the white would have showed up better. But just to give you an idea how it really isn't as difficult as I made it appear to be, I'm going to do a little bit of this black lace, and you'll see it's a lot easier. So it would be the same technique. I would put a color underneath if it had a color underneath. In this case, it's just white dress underneath the black lace. So I would take a fine line black marker. This is a brush tip, but you can use it with a fine line. And so if I was drawing the lace, it would come around the collar like this. It would have some gathers, so I'm going to put them in. Here, because there's so much of it bunched on top of each other, it's actually very dark. You see mainly black, and I'm making it a squiggle because, see, it's sort of ruffled up, and so I want it to look like it's ruffled up like that. Think about, this one also has scallops. A lot of times lace ends in scallops, so this one might be like this. Some of the scallops look wider or narrow because of the way they're laying in the fold. So there's the end of the scallop. Like I said with the white, oftentimes lace looks like lace because you have these little projections on the end, so just putting little dots kind of works for that. So I'll do that. And now inside here, we don't want to draw every little piece. It's get a kind of a scribbly effect like this. You see it's heavier, more scribbles down towards the bottom here of the scallop, and it's going down to less scribbles as it gets up to the top there. So that's what we're going to do. Usually laces are floral, paisley type designs, so rounded scribbles work pretty well. So there, with a minimum of messing around, sometimes put some little dots in here too. I'm going to make the folds have a little, you have the effect of lace coming down on the neckline. So that wasn't so difficult. I think the other one seemed much more difficult because I was working with white paint on top of the skin tone, which was way too pale. So, lace. Simple, not much to it. Same for any color. I used the white, which was more difficult. The black, you can make red lace, whatever color you have, just pick that color marker. So I'd like to do a little demo showing you how you can suggest fur. fur, is something that's very important to look at very carefully and see what you're seeing. Normally, what you see in fur is the under part of the fur is going to be darker, and then the hairs that come out towards you will be lighter. So it might actually work to use like the white paint and a little brush stroke to on top of a darker shade. This one, I think that the purple on the edge is just backlighting on the model. But you can see where the collar folds here, and underneath it's much darker. You're getting a reddish tone there. There's all kinds of fur. There's lighter furs. There's brown fur here. I don't know if I want to, this is a lot of stuff going on there. Let me pick a kind of a simpler fur collar type of thing. Well, I might just actually work on this lapel here. This is a pretty basic kind of fur you would see on a collar. So I'll take a minute to look at it, and I'm seeing it's got a lot of light brown and also some dark, almost black. So what I'm going to want to do is, well, first of all, I want to sketch the shape of it. So she has a face, and you have her scarf here, and then the collar comes down. It's a big, broad shawl kind of collar. So I'm just roughly showing the shape of it. And then there's a belt here. So we're going to just do the collar part of it and see what it looks like. So in this case, it looks like the top hairs are actually darker. So I'm going to start with the that sort of brown. It's a warm golden brown color. So I will use some brown. I'm going to throw some yellow in there. Yeah, I think it's something like this. So to start with, I'm going to fill the whole thing in with this color, because that's what I would call the base color of this fur. See, I'm not worrying about the edge of it right now with the hairs coming out. I'm just getting the general shape. Just like when you're drawing hair, you don't worry about drawing each individual hair. Same thing with fur. You want the general shape that the fur is taking. So this general shape is the shape of this shawl collar. So there we go. This is going to have to dry to do any more work on it, because otherwise everything's just going to bleed. So I'll let it dry for a minute. Okay, there's several ways I could go about this. I could use a brush or a marker. I'll show you kind of both ways. So on this half, I'm going to do it with a marker and a brush. So here's where I want to get the shagginess of the fur, and you can see also a little bit of kind of a seam there where the pieces are joined. So I'm going to make sure that gets in there a little bit. I'm just using very light little strokes with this, pulling them up quickly so that you're getting the furry edge. I usually try to do the edge first and then do the interior. So here we go. Back here it's lighter. I actually probably would want a lighter marker, but okay, so there's the edge. Now I'm going to bring it in. If you look, the very center is darkest, is black, but you do have fur everywhere. So I'm going to first, at the top it's light because the light's hitting it, so I'm not going to get too much of this brown up there. So let it be light where the light hits it. In the inside here, it also is fairly light, so I'm not going to put a lot of strokes there. Outside edge here gets a little darker, which is why I'm filling it in with more strokes. I'm leaving the center, leaving room for some black strokes, because it looks like there's sort of a blackish area going down the center. So here's my black Tarpy. So in the center, I'm going to see little short choppy strokes running in a similar direction, but I'm varying it just slightly so it doesn't look too mechanical and perfect. So there we go. Black in the center. And there's a little bit black up here too in the center part. You just keep going with the strokes until it gets to be the shade of darkness you think it should be, which is maybe like that, I think. So there's one way to do fur. Another way would be to use your pencil. On this side you have the same thing. You have some browns and blacks. So I could use a pencil. I'm using a colored pencil here. And it doesn't really want to write on there very well, does it? Let me try this one. Yeah, that's better. I'm doing the same thing with the colored pencil. This will give you a slightly softer look. This is very defined and graphic. If you want it to look a little softer and fuzzier or furrier, a pencil will give you a slightly softer look. It also blends in with the paint a little bit more. It doesn't stand out quite so much on top of it. Almost looks like it becomes a part of the paint. So it's kind of up to you which style you like. You can do either one. So there's some, then I'll use some black also because it has the same dark black in the middle here. So you can vary your strokes lighter and darker to get different tones of how light or dark it is. So this one might actually look a little more realistically soft and fuzzy like fur, whereas this one looks a little more graphic. You can see the strokes more, but either one looks a lot like fur. And you see, I didn't fill in every single last piece of it with fur because there's some places where you don't see as much texture, and it makes it look more 3D when you leave some lighter areas up to the front here. So that's it. Fur is pretty easy. I'm going to show you how to make a sweater knit of some sort, look like a knit. Now, the first thing to remember is that when you're trying to achieve a smooth texture, you want to use water media like watercolor, poster paint, which is just a cheaper version of gouache, even acrylic. Paints will go on smoothly and give you a smooth appearance, but when you want to do something that's fuzzy or has a texture to it, then you're better off using a combination of some paints with pencil or charcoal or something that gives a fuzzy appearance. The reason it comes across looking fuzzy is because paper has what's called a tooth. Even though it looks relatively smooth, it's not. It has a little texture to it. So when you take a pencil across it, what makes the color is the pencil rubs off on that tooth, and you see you get the speckled kind of light and dark, so it looks fuzzy. That's why we don't use colored pencil to do, say, a satin evening gown. It would look fuzzy, and it's not fuzzy, so that would be misleading. So I'm going to give you a rough idea of how to do the texture on this sweater. It's really not that difficult. Once again, first you're going to look at it, observe what you see before you draw, and then we'll go from there. So what I see is the texture in the sweater, like this is called a rib knit with the stripes, where it's indented, where like the ribs go in, it's darker because it's kind of in shadow. Same thing with this stitch. The yarn itself is light on top and there's shadow underneath. So this is a very pale, very neutral color, kind of a grayish beige. Those are sometimes hard colors to mix, but we'll do our best. We're just gonna do the sweater itself. I'm not going to worry about the model too much. So let's start like this. Let's see. I'm going to roughly mark in the shape of it and where different parts end. Okay, so that's really all I need to know. So I'm going to start with, I think, the paint, and just get the base color down with the paint. So like I said, it's kind of a gray beige. So I already have some gray here. That's sort of on the blue side, so maybe I'll mix just a touch of brown into it to, yeah, I think that's getting about what I want it to be. All right, so I'm going to put that on first. That's sort of the overall color of what it is. You'll notice that there's sort of some shadow here where the color rolls, so I'm going to get a little darker right there in the center because it's still soft. Damp. It did kind of bleed, which is nice. You get a sort of soft edge. The front of her body is lighter, the back is darker. I guess, in fact, actually there's a fold here. I guess the light's coming from the front. So I'll start with the front where it's lighter, lots of water, less paint. As I get around to the back, and I'm just, once again, I'm just kind of doing a very loose brush stroke. I'm not filling it in. As I get around to the back, I'll put a little bit more paint on it, get it just a little darker because it's more in shadow back here. Okay, I need a little darker. That might be too dark. There we go. Okay, so that's the basic undertone, the color. See, there's a little dark shadow right here under the edge of her collar. So I want to get some of that in. And it's a little darker down her back here. Shadow here. Okay, so that gives me the general color of the sweater itself. Once again, I'm going to put a little bit of color in her face, on her arm. Now because the sweater is kind of hanging out from her arm, what happens is you get a deep shadow here. So I'm going to get a nice neutral, put that shadow in under her arm. Actually, it's pretty much darker than that, so. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do with that. Now this needs to dry a little bit so that I can put the pencil on it. It's a little damp. Just going to use a standard pencil. Because it's a very neutral color, I'll probably go with a gray. If I don't want to use brown, that's too colorful. In fact, I might even just use my graphite pencil. Let's see what that looks like. So if I come in here, see how the stripes kind of wrap around with the shape of the curve of the collar? It's still a little damp, so it's not laying down so great, but and here that where they're kind of stretched out. Yeah, I'm going to go with slightly darker black. I'll try this. Yeah, this will give me a little better color. Where they stretch out a little bit further here, I'm making them a little bit wider. Little shading in there. So by curving them around the curve of the sweater, you get the effect of the sweater rolling and wrapping around her neck, which is kind of nice. So there we have that. Now this, generally, if you look at the overall, you see the stripes going like this and then kind of squiggly lines coming down. So that's what I'm going to try to achieve. The stripes that kind of go like this. Get it, a little darker where it's in the shadow. See how once again this also curves around her body. And it only goes to about here, and then we have just a couple stripes going this way. And then we have sort of a, so I'm just, once again, I'm just kind of suggesting, I'm not drawing it exactly. I'm just suggesting the texture of the sweater. That's what we really need to do. So here we have it going that way. The sleeves have the same kind of rib as you see up here. And you see how it kind of curves. Here I want to get a little nicer edge on the sleeve. So in here, I think I'm just going to suggest it like this. That gives me an idea of what's happening with the pattern. It just looks a little bit like that. So see, I'm not really trying to reproduce it exactly. I'm just, it has sort of this darker blob with the lines going in between. So I think that's enough to just suggest the kind of texture on the sweater. I might, define the edge a little bit with my pencil. In the front, because light hits it more, you don't have as dark with these, but in the shadow here in the back, they're going to get a little darker. So see, it looks like a sweater already, and it didn't really do too much to it. So let's give her some lips. Her nose. Through here. We'll give her her hair back here. And I could paint this all in too if I wanted to, but I just wanted to show you the texture of the sweater. So I think that does a nice job of suggesting that the knit on the sweater. So that's not too difficult. We've learned a little bit about how to create certain kinds of fabrics as texture. There's all kinds of texture in the world besides on fabrics. Everything has some sort of texture. The whole key to it, to creating any kind of texture in a drawing or a painting, is to look at it, observe carefully what you see, and then just experiment with different media and different techniques until you get the kind of a texture that you're looking for. It's really no magic to it. It's just experimentation and learning how to use different media. So go back and look at different parts of this video, try them all individually, and have fun.